Picture this. You spend the entire summer clawing your way up a mountain, match by match, tournament by tournament. And just when you finally reach the ledge you've been chasing, the ground shifts beneath you before you even get to enjoy the view. That's exactly what happened to Alex heading into Cincinnati. And within hours, the tennis world couldn't stop arguing about it. Some people called it the luckiest break of her career. Others called it proof that she'd arrived. And almost nobody agreed on which one was actually true. To understand why a single number next to her name could cause this much noise, you have to go back and look at the summer Alex was actually having, because this wasn't some unknown player who suddenly got handed a golden ticket out of nowhere. This was a 21-year-old from the Philippines who had spent months quietly, then not so quietly, forcing her way into conversations she had no business being part of yet, at least according to the old rankings. It started in Washington at the Mubadala DC Open. And if you want to talk about a moment that changes everything for a player, this was it. She wasn't even seeded going in. Nobody circled her name on the bracket sheet as a threat. And then she went out and won the entire tournament, beating a string of legitimate contenders along the way, including the top seed in the final. That's not a fluke run. That's a statement. Her first WTA singles title. And it didn't come against a watered-down field either. It came against players who had every reason to expect they'd be the ones hoisting the trophy. Winning a title like that does something to how the tour sees you. One week, you're the promising kid everyone's keeping half an eye on, and the next week, you're a problem other players have to actually prepare for. From Washington, the momentum rolled straight into Wimbledon. And if Washington was a statement, Wimbledon was the proof that it wasn't a one-off. She became the first Filipino player ever seeded at a Grand Slam. And then she went out and backed that seeding up, fighting her way to the fourth round on the most unforgiving stage in the sport. Grass doesn't forgive mistakes. It punishes hesitation. And Alex played like someone who belonged there, taking down opponents who were supposed to have the edge on paper. Every round she survived added another brick to a season that was quickly turning into the best of her young career. Then came the brutal stretch that tennis fans both love and dread, the North American hard court swing, where fatigue starts to matter just as much as talent. She carried her form into Toronto for the Canadian Open, and what she did there might be the most underrated part of this entire story. She strung together win after win, taking down real competition on a run that eventually stretched to 7 consecutive match victories across 2 tournaments, before finally running into Belinda Bencic, who ended the streak in a tense, physical battle in the round of 16. Here's the thing about that loss, though. It didn't feel like a collapse. It felt like a wall she hit after doing everything right for 2 straight weeks. She'd already banked a title, a career-best Grand Slam result, and now a deep run in Toronto as the 25th seed, no less. So even in defeat, her stock kept climbing. By the time she left Canada, her ranking told a story that didn't need any embellishment. World number 20, a career high. For a player who, not that long ago, was grinding through qualifying draws and lower-tier events just to get noticed, cracking the top 20 of women's tennis was the kind of jump that makes analysts sit up and take a second look. And yet, as impressive as all of that was, it was about to become only half the story. Because right as Alex was preparing to step into the Cincinnati Open, one of the most prestigious events on the entire WTA calendar, something completely outside of her control was unfolding behind the scenes. Something that was about to turn her name into the most talked-about storyline of the tournament before she'd even hit a single ball. If you've ever had your circumstances change dramatically because of decisions other people made, choices that had absolutely nothing to do with you, then you already understand what happened to Alex in the days leading up to Cincinnati. It started with a wave of withdrawal announcements, and not minor ones either. Karolina Muchova, one of the most technically gifted players on the entire tour, and a fixture inside the world's top 10, pulled out. Then came word that Jasmine Paolini, A Grand Slam finalist and one of the most dangerous, consistent players of the season, wouldn't be competing either. And then a third name dropped, Victoria Mboko, a rapidly rising Canadian talent who'd been turning heads all year, also stepped away from the event. 3 ranked players, 3 vacated spots, and one seeding line that was about to move in a way nobody saw coming. Here's how tournament seeding actually works, in case you're not deep into the mechanics of it. It's not some subjective panel making calls behind closed doors. It's built directly off of world ranking, cold and mathematical. So when higher-ranked players withdraw, everyone sitting just below them on the list gets bumped up to fill the gap they left behind. For Alex, sitting at a career-high world number 20, those 3 withdrawals were enough to push her all the way into the seeded portion of the draw, something that would have felt like a fantasy just a year earlier. She landed as the 17th seed, the best seeding of her career at a WTA 1000 event, a tier of tournament that sits just below the 4 majors in prestige and ranking points. On paper, that looks like nothing but good fortune. A first-round bye, official recognition as one of the tournament's 32 most significant players in the field. For someone who had climbed her way up from completely outside the rankings picture just a couple of years earlier, being formally seated at this level was a milestone worth genuinely celebrating. But tennis, and more specifically the people who follow it obsessively online, rarely take a story at face value. Almost the second the seeding list went public, the questions started flying. Was this seeding actually a fair reflection of where Alex stood as a player? Or was it an artificial bump created entirely by circumstances that had nothing to do with her own tennis? And look, there is a genuine, uncomfortable tension in earning a seed through other players' misfortune, rather than through a full season of ranking accumulation on your own. It doesn't erase the results that got her to world number 20 in the first place. Not even close, but it does complicate the narrative, turning what should have been a straightforward milestone into something the entire tennis world suddenly felt entitled to dissect. And dissect it they did. Within hours, commentators, fan pages, and tennis analysts were all weighing in on what this actually meant for her. Some framed it as simply how the sport works. Withdrawals happen constantly, and every single player who has ever climbed the seeding ranks has, at some point, benefited from someone else's misfortune. That's just the structure of tour tennis. Others were far more skeptical, wondering out loud whether Alex was really ready for the pressure that comes with being a seeded player at this level, no matter how she'd technically arrived there. What started as a routine seeding release turned into one of the loudest storylines heading into the tournament. And suddenly, for Alex, the question wasn't just how far she could go in Cincinnati. It became whether she could quiet the noise about how she'd gotten there in the first place. And once a storyline like this catches fire, it doesn't stay contained for long. It spread across social media almost instantly, splitting fans and analysts into 2 very different camps. On one side, people framed the seeding shift as nothing but a well-earned gift, a rare bit of good fortune for a player who had already proven all season she deserved to be taken seriously as a genuine contender. To them, this was simply the tour finally rewarding months of elite-level tennis with a structural break instead of another uphill climb through the bracket. On the other side, a more skeptical wave of commentary kept building. Some argued that a seeding earned mostly through withdrawals, rather than through a longer stretch of consistent ranking points, didn't carry quite the same weight as one earned outright. Others focused on something less about optics and more about psychology, wondering whether Alex would feel added pressure knowing her seeded status arrived with a bit of an asterisk attached, one written entirely by circumstances she had zero control over. Every athlete wants their achievements to feel unquestionably their own. And this particular seeding jump complicated that in a way few of her earlier milestones ever had. And then there was the reality of the actual draw itself, which added an entirely new layer to the debate. Because despite the improved seeding, her projected path through the tournament remained absolutely brutal. Reports out of the draw had her potentially opening against Magda Linette or Eleanor Ruse, then possibly running into two-time Grand Slam finalist Amanda Anisimova in the third round. Before a potential fourth-round meeting with Linda Noskova, the reigning Wimbledon champion who had already beaten Alex twice that season. And if she somehow found a way through that gauntlet, Jessica Pegula loomed as a realistic quarterfinal opponent, with Elena Rybakina sitting as a possible semifinal roadblock, and Aryna Sabalenka, the world's top-ranked player, waiting at the very end as the projected final. In other words, no matter how favorable that 17th seed looked on paper, Alex was still staring down one of the most dangerous potential runs of matches in the entire draw. And that detail completely reframed the conversation happening online. Was this really an advantage at all? Or was it just a seeding technicality that changed almost nothing about how difficult her actual path through the tournament would be? Some analysts argued the real benefit was more subtle than people were giving it credit for. Things like avoiding a nightmare early-round matchup against a dangerous unseeded floater, or simply gaining a first-round bye that offered a small but valuable window of physical recovery after an exhausting stretch through Washington and Toronto. Others maintained that in a draw this loaded near the very top, seeding numbers barely matter once you get past the third or fourth round anyway. Because at that point, you're just playing whoever's standing across the net, regardless of what number is attached to their name. Alex herself, when asked directly about all of this heading into the tournament, kept her answer notably grounded. Instead of engaging with the seeding debate at all, she talked about wanting to use the short break before Cincinnati to actually reset. Spending time with friends, a haircut, getting her nails done. Small, ordinary moments completely disconnected from the intensity of tour life. It was a subtle response, but a telling one, because it suggested she understood something that a lot of the online discourse seemed to be missing. That no amount of debate about her seeding number was going to determine a single point of what happened once she actually stepped onto the court. Still, the noise didn't fade. If anything, it got louder as the tournament's opening rounds crept closer, with nearly every preview segment and prediction piece circling back to the same central question. Was this Cincinnati seeding boost real, or was it just a headline dressed up to look bigger than it actually was? And here's where every storyline built purely on debate eventually collides with something far more physical and far less abstract. And for Alex, that collision came in the form of pure exhaustion. Because while the tennis world was busy arguing over what her seeding truly meant, she was quietly dealing with the accumulated toll of an extraordinary but absolutely grueling stretch of tennis. 7 consecutive match wins across 2 tournaments do not come free. They come with a cost that builds in the legs, in the shoulders, in the mind, in ways that don't always show up until the exact moment you need your body to hold up under pressure. Professional tennis at this level isn't just a test of skill, it's a test of your ability to recover match after match, tournament after tournament, often with almost no real rest in between. Her round of 16 exit in Toronto against Bencic marked the end of that particular win streak, but it didn't erase the physical bill that had been quietly stacking up across those 2 demanding weeks. If anything, that loss exposed exactly how much fuel she had left in the tank, because the margin between winning and losing in that match came down to the smallest details, the exact kind of details that fatigue tends to expose ruthlessly. And then, almost immediately, she was thrust straight into a brand-new tournament, carrying a fresh set of expectations, a controversial seeding storyline following her into every single press conference, and a draw that remained just as difficult as it would have been without any withdrawal-driven boost at all. There was no extended recovery window, no easing back in against lower-ranked opposition, just a handful of days of rest before facing a stacked bracket that included some of the most dominant players currently in the sport. This is where the fallout from the seeding controversy stopped being about public perception and started becoming something far more tangible. The very success that had propelled her to a career high ranking, and an improved seeding was the exact same success that left her running on fumes heading into one of the most demanding stretches of matches she'd face all year. It's a pattern that shows up again and again across professional sports. The players who achieve the most are often the ones with the least amount of time to actually recover before the next enormous challenge lands on their doorstep. Alex addressed this reality head-on in the lead-up to the tournament, speaking openly about wanting to take the lessons learned from those 2 demanding weeks in Toronto and apply them more effectively going forward. Not just in Cincinnati, but heading into the U.S. Open as well, her final Grand Slam of the season. It was a mature, self-aware acknowledgement that this moment required more than raw talent alone. It required smart, deliberate management of a body that had been pushed to its absolute limits across an unforgiving summer schedule. But here's the thing about acknowledging a challenge versus actually overcoming it under real match pressure. Those are 2 completely different tests. Would fatigue dull the aggressive, flat ball-striking style that had carried her through so many matches this season? Would the mental resilience that defined her breakout run holed up under the combined weight of physical exhaustion and a seeding controversy that simply refused to quiet down? And there was another layer sitting underneath all of this too, the weight of expectation from back home. Alex wasn't just representing herself walking into Cincinnati. She was carrying the hopes of an entire nation that had rallied around her rise with genuine, overwhelming passion. That kind of support brings incredible energy, no question about it. But it also adds a form of pressure that never shows up on a stat sheet. Every match now carried weight beyond the actual scoreline, and every potential setback risked feeling like something far bigger than her own personal disappointment. But every controversy eventually meets its most important test, the truth of what actually happens once the noise fades and the matches finally begin. And the truth about Alex's Cincinnati seeding turned out to be far more nuanced than either side of the online argument really wanted to admit. Yes, the seeding boost was driven by withdrawals rather than pure, gradual ranking accumulation, but that doesn't mean it carried 0 real value. A first-round bye, however small it might look on paper, offered a genuine window of recovery after 2 grueling weeks on the road. Time that could realistically be the difference between stepping onto court fresh versus stepping onto court still dragging the fatigue of Toronto behind her. There was also a detail that got almost completely lost in the surrounding noise. Alex wasn't defending any ranking points in Cincinnati at all, since she hadn't competed in the tournament the previous year. That meant every single point she earned during the event was pure upside, with absolutely nothing at risk on the ranking table. In a season already defined by fearless, aggressive tennis, this was a tournament where she could compete with total freedom, completely unburdened by the usual anxiety of protecting points she'd already banked. And the potential reward on the table was substantial. A strong showing in Cincinnati carried the very real possibility of pushing Alex into the top 16 of the world rankings, a threshold with direct, tangible consequences for her seeding at the U.S. Open, her final Grand Slam of the season. Top 16 seeding at a major tournament means avoiding the very best players in the world until much later in the draw, a structural advantage that can genuinely be the difference between an early exit and a run deep into the second week of a Grand Slam. Viewed through that lens, the seeding controversy that dominated headlines in the days before the tournament even started began to look a lot less significant than the underlying opportunity sitting right in front of her. Whether her 17th seed was earned purely through her own results or accelerated by circumstance ultimately mattered far less than what she chose to do with the opportunity it created. And the players circling around her in that projected draw, Anisimova, Noskova, Pegula, Rybakina, Sabalenka, while undeniably elite, weren't opponents Alex had never proven capable of testing. Her season had already shown again and again that when the stakes rose, so did her level of play. Maybe the most honest way to resolve this entire storyline is to admit that both sides of the debate were partially right. The seeding advantage was real, but it was modest. The draw remained genuinely difficult no matter what number was attached to her name. And the true story of Cincinnati was never actually going to be decided by a seeding announcement made days before the first ball was even struck. It was always going to be decided by what happened once she stepped onto the court, and the rankings stopped mattering entirely. So, as Alex's season rolls on toward its final Grand Slam of the year, the real question isn't whether her Cincinnati seeding was fair or fortunate. It's whether this entire episode becomes just a small footnote in a much bigger story, or the exact moment that revealed how she handles pressure that has absolutely nothing to do with the player standing across the net from her. If you think Alex is built to handle whatever comes next, drop it in the comments and make sure you're subscribed. Because this story